H.P. Lovecraft.
Howard Phillips Lovecraft.
H.P. Lovecraft.
Lovecraftian.
Howard Phillips Lovecraft.
You may have heard whispers of the story category known as Lovecraft or Lovecraftian. Used correctly or not, the term reflects one of the most ancient and impactful series of events that still affects literature today. We would be remiss to not be aware of H.P. Lovecraft, who I believe to be the founder of existentialism horror within literature. H.P. Lovecraft was born August 20th, 1890 in Providence, Rhode Island. I suspect this location had something to do with how weird he turned out. There are some things going on over there, but Lovecraft was born into an impoverished family, and as an escape he would often traverse into textbooks of chemistry and astronomy with hopes of attending Brown University when he graduated. This dream would never be fully realized, however, as he was famously a shut-in with a closed mind towards the unknown, as you can see in his literature as he develops as a writer. As a byproduct of his impoverished community, H.P. had to choose where to hold back on his payments for investment in the future, and he, very intelligently, decided to hold back on nourishing himself. Proper sustenance. This limitation put in his food supply often meant that he had to consume canned and expired foods above anything else, which also aided in his alienation from others, eventually leading to him not being able to get medical care for his health issues, and leading to an emotional breakdown at just age 17 in high school. The breakdown not only hindered his social life, but also prevented him from graduating high school. It's also important to mention here that Lovecraft's father was institutionalized for a very similar reason in 1986, where he later died due to complications with syphilis. His wife and Lovecraft's mother would follow a very similar fate a few decades later, being institutionalized for a mental breakdown. This suggests that the Lovecraftian family had a Lovecraft's family had a very strong mental illness trait, which you can again see very well reflected within his writings. As no one else in his time was really trying the things that he was trying, if you're looking to his writing, you'll often see themes of like manifestation of worries for social anxiety and the unknown put into monsters. Lovecraft has actually mentioned this mentality that he had towards others and the unknown many times throughout his works, and regarded it as one of the greatest shames of his lifetime. Specifically, he believes, stemming from a higher level of mathematics that he was placed under within high school. It was these beliefs combined with the interest in science and chemistry that he had, and a few other traits that we won't discuss here, let's just separate the art from the artist, that led to the development of his literature. H.P. reportedly started out at an amateur level, inspired by classic Greek mythology works and the Arabian Nights, a collection of folktales from the Middle East that you've probably heard of today, actually. The stories were written well before his time, and because of that they had a different ideology behind how writing should look, and he took a real interest within that writing, him adopting this style leading to him becoming a famed author post-mortem. We can know so many things about this man who wasn't even famous within his own time by looking at H.P.'s correspondence letters throughout his adult life. For a prime example of this, we can look at the letter he wrote to Maurice Moe on January 16, 1918. Here he confides in being interested in poetry at a young age that concerned his inspirations. This would have been between the ages of 9 and 13 for him. To take a sidebar here, I want to mention that a lot of his correspondences are behind copyright and paywall, but you can still access quite a few of them through Brown University's online repository, where they've scanned and corrected his letters. Lovecraft's initial interest in writing that was spurred by these stories was put on halt for a near decade following the death of his grandfather, which pushed Lovecraft's family further into a decline which pushed Lovecraft's family further into an economic decline. Due to this, H.P. only picked back up the quill in 1913, shortly after he failed to graduate high school. The sudden interest was spurred by his reading a story within the Argosy magazine. He found the story to be quite poorly crafted and wrote a letter to the magazine to particularly gripe on the stories of one of their authors, Fred Jackson. Many others of the magazine also feuded with the reader, who disagreed with a lot of their writing styles. This feud actually led to Lovecraft being invited onto the Amateur Press Association by Edward F. Doss. Lovecraft accepted this invitation as a new platform to release his essays, and later his return to horror fiction with the releases of The Tome and Dagon. These stories were his first to be heavy in psychological horror, specifically related to those around the protagonists seeing them as mental. Definitely a nod to Lovecraft's past. It was around this time that the earlier event I discussed took place, where in 1921 H.P. Lovecraft's mother suffered a mental illness that had her confined to the same institution as her late husband, where she shortly after died. The tragedy led to Lovecraft fully facing into his writing and putting everything he could into it. His doubled efforts were encouraged by like-minded authors of his time, most notably Sonia H. Green, who he met at an amateur press convention. Sonia later also ended up marrying Lovecraft in 1924, following his then professional publishing of his new story Dagon in The Weird Tales, a popular American horror fiction and fantasy magazine. Lovecraft briefly moved to New York with his bride following their marriage, but had to move back to Providence soon after as they weren't able to pull together the funds needed to justify the move. It was quickly after his move back to Providence, actually, that Lovecraft created his most influential piece. In 1926, he wrote The Call of Cthulhu, which worked as a major stepping stone for establishing his form of mythology, which would later be worked on by other writers. I won't fully go into an analysis of his popular works at the time, because there are those much more talented than me that could do it a lot better, and I also just don't want to do that. But you really should check them out, as it is fascinating to see how much they reflected in modern day literature that deals with those categories of story. To end Lovecraft's story, he was diagnosed with intestinal cancer in 1936, and his refusal to visit a doctor meant that it quickly overtook him, claiming his life the following year. He died an unknown author. But just because his life story came to an end, there was no reason for his works to stop flourishing. As August Derleth, his literary executor, pushed out the story of Cthulhu further and expanded on the mythology himself, Lovecraft was able to reach an unimaginable amount of posthumous fame. Lovecraft's style made him seem a visionary, this idea being supported by his works only soon after his death becoming popular. Following his anxiety for the unknown, he quickly delved into the relative vastness of the universe surrounding humanity, pushing his writing style into a more existentialist niche. He paired this with the dread of ultimately seeming insignificant in comparison to a greater power. This breakdown applies to the majority of his works. Lovecraft was also known for his deliberately complex paragraph structure. He strayed away from simplistic sensory detail. Here's a famous example. If I must die, I reflected, then was this terribly yet majestic cavern as welcome a sepulchre at which any churchyard might afford, a conception which carried with it more of tranquility than of despair. While it would be easy in this scenario to say something along the lines of, I figured if I died here it'd be as good a place as any, he preferred to bend language in a way that brought sensory detail to the forefront of the reader's mind, repetitively detailing the surroundings in which the story would take place. Unfortunately, while he came close to mastering this technique, authors that try and replicate his often fall short. Just as an ending note, I'm going to try and forge together a single definition across all my sources that can explain what Lovecraftian work looks like. Pay attention, Hunter. To say that something is Lovecraftian is to mean that it emphasizes the insignificance of oneself when placed in comparison to something of near incomprehensible power due to its sinister and uncanny nature. Please, for the love of God, anyone watching, tell me what to cover next. I need help.